Welcome back, everybody. We're going to be working on the exercise here for Unit 11. I do have the document pulled up. We are going to be working with the My Guitar Shop database. I do have the old Chapter 12 PowerPoint in this unit folder too, if you guys are curious. I know that there's references here to the old Chapter 12. Do have the PowerPoint, but we don't have the book. So if you guys want to read up a little bit more, you can look at that information. The document pulls up, and we're going to start by just doing a really basic view creation. One thing that, as I mentioned in the lecture portion, is the naming convention. I prefer that you guys use. And once again, this is a convention. It's not a rule of any sort. But I think it's a really good policy to follow this, especially when you start working if you're always writing the nitty-gritty SQL code, using those prefixes on any named kind of weird object like indexes or views or procedures, whatever, and using a prefix helps you identify it in the code really fast. So I'm going to kind of like suggest very strongly that you guys do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and make sure MySQL is running. So let's check the task manager here and make sure the service is running in the background. You guys know that I have a tendency to not run my memory active, and you can see it is indeed stopped. So I'm going to go ahead and start it. Right, not that it takes that much resources, but hey, you know what? When you're gaming, you want all the resources you can get, right? Right. You don't want your system doing stuff that it's not supposed to be doing. All right, let's go ahead and launch MySQL Workbench. And let's get our databases loaded up here. Logging in as root. And then, of course, I have a bunch of open tabs from last time, so I'm just going to close all those. The other thing I'm going to do really quick is I have my SQL file open from last time, and I never saved it, so I should be smart. Thank you, MySQL Workbench, for not blowing it away, by the way. But let's, that is the Unit 10 code, which asks the question, what happened to Unit 9? Well, Unit 9 was the normalization unit, so that was all spreadsheets, right? That's why it's not there. All right, so now that that's saved, let's go ahead and close that. We'll create a new SQL file. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in our use statement so we can attach to the correct database. And we're going to use the My Guitar Shop database. Semicolon, and then go ahead and execute that query. And it looks like we're all good. We're all attached and ready to do the first directive. So let's go read up on this one now. It says, create a view named view order total that displays the order ID and the total of the associated orders. All right. And this is going to want us to both create the query to do so, and then execute the query to make sure that it worked and we're getting the right results, right? So build the query first, make sure that it works, add the view aspect to it, and then run the view to make sure that it's returning the data all on its own. So let's start with some basics here. We're going to start with just the basic select statement. And I'm going to leave a blank line here so I can add the view part of it afterwards. But let's write the select. And they're asking for the order ID and total of the associated orders. So if you forget the structure of our database, this is where we would go in now and take a look at how this is all put together. So one logical place, of course, to look is the orders table. So we can see the data inside there and, basically the order ID, right? And then all the little pertinent details that go with it. Now, we're looking for the order total. Is that expressed here? Not really, right? What do we have here that might help us, though? The shipping amount? tax amount, is that part of the order total? I would say so, right? Um, yeah, and you know, I think this is kind of interesting too, because this kind of alludes to like maybe an online business. And did you guys know that if you purchase something from a business out of state that doesn't have a presence in your own state, you don't have to pay the sales tax on it to them, right? And I'm going to say that real carefully, right? But you're supposed to, like, if you bought $1,000 computer from Minnesota and that company doesn't have a presence in Wisconsin, you're supposed to report it on your income tax that you made an out-of-state purchase and then pay for the tax on it. And guess what people do? They just don't do it. But if you go to the DMV, because we just bought a car for our son, and we bought a used car, and of course you go to get a title, right? And they're like, well, how much did you pay for it? And then it's like, oh, darn, that's right, there's sales tax, right? So that registration went from a couple $100 up to, you know, several $100 basically when you're all said and done. But somebody's got to pay the sales tax, right? But the ship amount is important. Like, and here's the thing: is this how much the shipping costs, or is this the shipping weight? Oh God, who's to know, right? Well, the database designer hopefully would know. But the tax amount certainly sounds like a monetary figure just by looking at how it's laid out. The other aspect is there's also the order items table, right? So I'm just kind of like grounding us here on the information once again, because we do forget. Like a week goes by and we haven't touched this database in like 2 weeks basically, and then we forget the information that's in it. Well, here's information that does seem to matter, right? We do have the item price, and then there's a discount amount, meaning how much we can discount it by. But once again, that doesn't give us a price. Do you guys feel where that's going? Right. So we got to do some like math here. Now, in principle, when somebody's ordering a product, we're going to usually look at how much it costs times how many they're ordering. And because we're selling guitars here, chances are people aren't buying 2 guitars at a time. Most of the time, they might buy like 2 drumsticks, or they might buy, something like that, but they're not going to buy 2 guitars at a time typically. So usually it's going to be a simple calculation. Now, if they were buying, let's say, guitar picks, right, you might get a dozen, right? So you might be able to multiply it all. But either way, we can't kind of neglect that fact. But I think what we've identified here is that we have 2 tables that we're pulling information from. So when we go to write this query, we need to pull that back. Now, some pieces of information that we do need is the order ID, right? And we will need whatever the price is. And right now, I don't know what that is or how we're going to calculate it yet. But we also have to know what tables that we're pulling from. So we are going to pull from the order items table. That seems to be where most of the financial information is. So let's pull that one first. And then let me ask you this. Do we need to go to the other table? Yeah, because, all right. So that's not necessarily clear here, because I'm looking at the stuff that they're pulling back as an example, and they're just pulling back the order ID and the total of the order, right? Did they say anything about shipping cost here? Right. And here's the other thing. If there's a shipping cost, has it even shipped yet? Has the cost been incurred? There's a lot of unknowns here. Right now, we can adjust, keep in mind, we can adjust this later. And if you're not picking up on the clue here, that's kind of what we're going to do, right? We're going to build it and adjust it. So, all right, so let's just do a really basic build then. So we're going to pull from basically the order items table. And then if we're going to pull in information and summarize a price, let's do a sum. And then for the sum, we'll just take simply the quantity. So that's a column inside that table. And we're going to multiply it by the item price, knowing well in advance that there's not going to be many that are going to be multiples here. There might be, one rich guy that orders, 2 Les Pauls or something, perhaps. All right. We're also going to take this because this is a calculation, right? We're taking 2 columns and calculating them together. So we want to give it a name as it appears in the output. So we'll just call it total. So we're going to select the order ID, which is kind of a given. Then we're going to calculate the selling price. We're going to list it as total. It's coming from the order items table. And then we'll do a little bit of grouping and ordering here. So we'll group by the order ID, and then we'll order by the total descending. So highest purchases will be listed up at the top. So that's the basic query. Let's see if this works. So we're going to run it. And then if we're lucky, right now look at the order IDs and the totals, and then compare them to the samples. That looks like the same values, right? So we're pulling the right information. All right. So if the query is working, converting this now to a view is really just a mechanical process of adding the create view stuff to the first line. And this is what's so cool about this technique, right? You write your query, you get it to work, and then you can convert it into a view like 1, 2, 3. So I'm creating a view. I am going to name it. The convention, at least the one that I recommend that you use, this is not a rule, remember, but a convention, is I just use VW for view. Not because I own a bunch of them and drive them, but that's true also. But because to me, when I see this in code, if I use this as part of another query, I can identify immediately that it's a view. But I don't have to guess. It's built into the name. And then I add the as keyword after it, and now it will become a view. Now, here's what's interesting about this. When you look at your schema tables here on the side, right, you notice that there's a whole separate category, right below the tables category for views. And right now there is no little expander arrow there because there are no views created in this database. But the moment I come back over here and run the query, you will notice as I refresh the schema table that we now have a view here. And then if I want to just do like the brute force viewing of it, right, by clicking that third little icon, there you go. Now that query is there. And all it takes, right, is this super simple little query, right? And this is overly verbose, really, but it's just a select all from that view. Okay. So now, the next directive, part 2 of the first exercise is to basically run that query that we just ran. So practice it, right? Do a select all. And it's really just as simple as that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do the run, and then you should see the output, right? So, okay, going back to this concept of data abstraction. Now, whenever I look at this in my database, or this over here in the schema table, it really represents all this. And mind you, this is actually a pretty simplistic query. It's not a very complicated one, but it could be one that had a bunch of criteria in it, a bunch of math in it, a bunch of table joins and all that kind of stuff all wrapped into one. And now I can refer to it by one higher level name, and there's the information. It just pops up. You guys all good? Everybody got it to work? All right, let's move on to the next exercise. We're doing great on time, by the way, so that's good for today. It says, now create a view called large order total using the view that we just created, right? So we're going to utilize the view we have. And your new view must use the previous view as part of the query. All right, so when we do the from, where are we pulling it from? We're pulling it from the previously existing view. And it says, however, only display those orders larger than $1,000. All right, so let's go ahead and start building this. Now, keep in mind, part of the task here is to create a new view. But so, for example, if you guys remember kind of the procedure of this, like how do I do a comment in MySQL, right? Dash, right? And I said, I'm just going to put a little message. We will create a view, but let's get the query working first. And this is my recommendation. Always get the query working first. Creating the view in the aftermath is a piece of cake, right? If the query works, the view is good, right? So we'll replace that line there. In fact, we'll leave that line there and we'll just start building the query. So if I'm going to select, what was the directive again? Only orders larger than $1,000. That's really the directive. All right, so we are still going to select the order ID. Okay, but mind you, where are we selecting it from? We're going to select it from that view, right? Which we're kind of seeing at the bottom of the screen here, or almost at the bottom of the screen. So we're going to pull in that order ID. That would be helpful. And then we also want to put the money up on the screen, right? So the total already exists. And okay, so this next thing I'm going to do is kind of superfluous, but sometimes when you're calculating financial amounts, you don't know like the kind of metrics that you're using in the financial calculations. So sometimes you might get dollar amounts that have more, digits after the decimal point than is displayed here. So it's often very safe to do a round function, and round function, right? Where we would take the total and round it to 2 decimal places. I'm going to call this superfluous because we already know it's going to work out without, but I'm just saying, right? We'll still call our output total because we're still going to be looking at the total amount when it comes down to it. But now when we do our from statement, we are not pulling from a particular table. We're pulling from a pre-existing view. So we're just going to call the pre-existing thing. And in fact, I'm just going to copy paste it, right? Why type and make a mistake, right? So it's coming from that view. And then we can just use regular query criteria where we're going to say where the total is basically greater than $1,000. So it has to be $1,000.01 in order for it to grab the information. Let's run that, see if it pulls back the info first. Okay. All right. And is that the right stuff? Okay, well, here's how we would find out. We can go here and go, yeah, there was 4 of them that were higher than 1,000. So this looks to be the correct output. Okay. Now we can make this into a view very simply, once again, by adding the create view command. They wanted us to call it VW large order total as command. And then once we run this, knowing that the query already works, it's just going to create this as a view object, which we'll see over here. So let's go ahead and run that. All right. Looks like it worked. We'll come back here, refresh our schema, and there it is, right? Notice when I click on this, right, we do get all the standard schema information. We see the data types, we see the column names, but just be mindful of the fact that a view does not store the information. It's an instruction set to retrieve the information. That's kind of the essential difference here. All right. Now, after you got all that working, right, what you're supposed to do is to go ahead and run that view. Oops. And see, I'm copy pasting from my other screen and never hit copy. So you can just run select all from that view. Let's run it. Here's the run. And there's the output. And you see the output is still the same. Let's look at the next directive because I think, so we did that. We created the query. We executed the query. Next command says, let's go back to the original view order total and modify it. Now we want to include the discount amount as part of the calculation. So you see how I brought that up before, right? That really should be part of the calculation. If we're getting a discount, I want my discount, and it's really funny now that I've crossed the 60 threshold and I go into a store, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that senior discount. Thank you. 10%, I'll take it. You know, why not? All right, but here we got this directive to do this. And so therefore it says we want to include the discount amount as part of the calculation. So it's going to be a little bit of a modification. And then we should have a net total for each order ID. So we're going to be putting a little bit more into it. So now here's two different ways we can approach this. And I'm going to like kind of give you what I think is what I feel is a safer way to do it versus what it is we were just lectured on doing, right? So when we went to W3 and we looked at views and we wanted to change a view, do you guys remember what the approach was? Yeah, right. Updating a view. We want to use this create or replace view, and then hopefully it works correctly, right? So I will tell you that, and maybe this is because of like coming more from an old school approach on this. In the old days when we would do this on a database, what I would usually do first, and you guys don't have to do this, I'm just throwing it out there as an example, is what I would typically do is I would actually just drop the view and then recreate it, right? Okay, now if you think about create or replace, that's what that command does. But the reason I would do this is because then I would watch it disappear. I still had the code right up here that I could just tweak. So it wasn't really a big deal to recreate. But think of the converse situation. What if you don't have the SQL file that created the view in the first place? All right, well then create or replace might actually be a smarter thing. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there. And I'm going to put this in here as a comment and just say, you could do this first and just create from scratch. Right, so that's one approach. Right? And that's just something to think about. But let's try the create or replace approach. So I'm going to go ahead and say create or replace. We'll put in the name, not VS, VW, and that was called order total. Now, think about this. We still need the as keyword. If I'm going to replace the one above, could I just copy what I have up here? And the answer is yes, of course, right? I could copy the whole thing and added or replace here, I guess, whatever. It's already typed in now, so let's just copy that, paste it in. And then let's see what we have to do to tweak this. So we still want to see the order ID, right? And keep in mind that as we look at the document, you know, it shows us what we're supposed to put up on the screen. So we still want the order ID. We still want a total. It's going to be calculated. And then we're going to have a net price, I think they call it net total, right? So total with discount, you know, whatever you want to call that. All right. So question, do we change this calculation? No, I don't think we touched that one at all. But we do need another column though, right? All right, so the other column is to take this item, whatever its price is. Now think about this. If I want the discount price and I multiply quantity times price, but if there's a discount on the price, how do I adjust that to make it happen? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Think about it. I take that original calculation, but I want to subtract from the item price the discount amount, right? And that's a discount underscore amount. And if you want to be sure that, you know, order operations is preserved, you would do this. And then if you wanted to make sure it rounded to the right dollar value, you could do this. Right. And I'm going to call all of that kind of really unnecessary. The rounding is probably unnecessary because of the way the stuff's in the database already. So I am going to remove that, but I'm just demoing, like, you know, like if you were dealing with gasoline or something like that, you would totally put that in. Right. So this is how you calculate it. We want to output it as they're showing, and the way they're showing it is they're aliasing it as total with discount. And I'm not sure that that really, whatever, you know. And folks, it doesn't have to look that ugly either. You can put quotes around it and you can put spaces in there. Or if you want, you could do like this kind of thing. That looks a little better. Other things, like if you want to go in, and some of you will think like this, you want to format it as money, dollar signs and commas, you can do that too. I wouldn't worry about it too much. That's not what we're being asked here. All the other query stuff comes from the same location. Do you see any reason we should change any of this? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything here to change. I am seeing an error here. I'm going to hover. It says create or replace VW order total. All right. So it doesn't seem like it's going to let us do this. All right. And there's a reason for this, by the way. So let's go ahead and try to execute this query and see if it throws an error, and it did. And I want you to look at the error code down here, right? It says you have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual that corresponds to your MySQL server version, right syntax near, blah, 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 blah. And really what they're telling us is they're not allowing this command in this database structure. So this feature is locked down. Now, we haven't gotten to the chapter yet where we've learned about user access rights control over tables and what we're allowed to do and not do. But there are these safety things that they build in here. Like, they're like, okay, you're replacing this. Are you really sure you want to do that? This is really what they're telling us, right? So remember when I said do the drop view thing? Okay, so now you guys will see the method to my madness, right? So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to reactivate this command, right? Oops. You see that there's like an approach that I'm using here. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Notice how the view went away immediately. And now we're going to create this once again. It's still throwing an error. And why is it throwing an error? Oh, duh. All right. Let's try this. What did I forget? Yeah, nobody caught it, including me. Yeah, I did create or replace. I just never said what. What am I creating or replacing? I'm creating or replacing the view, right? And I thought my permissions were locked down. That's not the case. All right, my bad. Here we go. Here's the run. Now I already deleted it, right? So did it recreate it? Well, there's proof that it did. All right. Now, of course, the trick is to run that view, right? This is the revised version. And I want you to notice now, when you just click on it in the schema table, how it does include the the one new column with the information. Now, watch the run on this. So once again, we already ran this command up here. And I could just run it from here, obviously, but I'm going to pull it down here, just so it goes with the exercise, right? You guys should be putting this in the document. Just go ahead and run that. There you go. Is it doing it correctly? Well, I don't know. You really what you have to do, if you want to make sure of it, is you have to go back and look at the items. So for example, so if this guitar here is 11, let's do it's 11.99. We're subtracting 359.7. It's 839, and we sell two of those. And so that's 1678.60. Does that match up with what we have here? Yeah, 1678.60. And now it seems kind of goofy to pull out a calculator or a spreadsheet or whatever and verify the math that's going on. But the first time you run any equation in code, you should be verifying that it's working correctly. Doesn't necessarily, just because you're typing it on a computer doesn't mean it's doing the math correctly. It's only as good as the logic you're putting into it. So you could use flawed logic. So very often, and data people in particular, if you guys are ever doing calculations, and you'll learn this a lot in the data analytics classes, is verify your calculations, especially if they're complicated or over a range inside of a spreadsheet typically, or some other mechanism to prove that the math is correct, even if you're typing it in a calculator like I just did. That way, if I get the formulas working right, I can then be assured that in every scenario they work correctly. You would test all that stuff. All right, everybody's good? Okay. Let's move on. Create some more blank lines here. A good portion of this done already. Just trying to find where my instructions are here. Documents. All right. And one of the directives, if you notice, is for the next one is to actually do the drop, right? And so I think we kind of proved this exercise already because I kind of did it in advance. But basically this concept of like, if you use a create or replace, but you've already dropped it, then it doesn't get created, right? So let's just do what it says, which is to do the drop. So we'll do drop view, and we're going to drop the VW large order total. We'll run that query. You see it immediately disappear from the schema table. I think it's interesting, like, why does the delete show up right away, but when you add something, it doesn't come up right away? Yeah, I don't get it. It must take a moment to write it or something like that. All right, the next directive is, it says, let's create a updatable view. And this is kind of an interesting thought here. And there is like a link here that we should follow, right? So let's do the due diligence here, following the link and reading up on it, right? And okay, so now I'm doing inside of here, and we're getting all the ads. So I'm going to switch back over to Brave. Too late now. The advertisers already got their pound of flesh or whatever. So here's this interesting concept, right? And here's where we start to tie in a little bit to application development. This concept that we can take a view and make it updatable or alterable on the fly, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that we can do this, right? You can see some of the syntax that they're allowing, right? So it says, to create an updatable view, defining the view must not contain any of the following elements. So like there's a lot of stuff in here that we might use in a query, right? So they don't want you to join stuff, right? They don't want any unions or havings or group bys or a subquery, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that we would normally do that we want to kind of leave alone. So we would basically pull the information that we need. And notice this is just a really basic query here, just pulling in some columns, giving it a name, right? And then we can use the update statement to basically, we're going to be updating the view to look for certain pieces of information very specifically. So for example, in this scenario, they've created a view called office info, which includes these three columns. Okay, so just basic data dump, right? Then we're using the update command, which will set the phone number where the office code is for. So it'll go in here and change this phone number, right? And then if you want to see the change, right, you can just do a select where the office code equals 4, and then you can see that it actually changed, right? So this is kind of an interesting thought. I don't know if you guys are picking up on what the efficiency is here, right? But that we're not having to rewrite all the query elements in order to change a piece of information where normally we would, right? So this is kind of the little trick here. So we're gonna kind of do this in a multi-step process. So let's go back now to the description here and let's talk through this. It says create a view named customer info displaying the customer ID, first name, last name, and active from the customer's table. And the active column was created earlier as a small int. Okay, so I'm not really sure why that's pertinent, but let's go ahead and create that view. Or excuse me, yeah, would that be a view? That would be a view. But once again, let's start with the query. And so the query is going to be, well, they told us the columns they want. So we're going to do customer ID. We'll do first name. We'll do last name. And then we're also checking the active column. You guys remember when we created that, right? I didn't want that over there. Now it's pulling that up as a keyword, which is kind of interesting. What table are we pulling from? From customers. All right. And what I feel compelled to do right now is to look at that table because that keyword, it's listing in there, right? They're kind of highlighting it as a keyword. We'll see what happens, right? But it clearly has a column name here. And if you remember, we look at that data. Oh, okay. And not everyone is set to active or not active, right? So one thing we might want to do, and I'm just like, it would be better output is if we went through here and updated all of these and made them either one way or the other. We have a couple in there, so we should at least get a couple of results. So I'm not really too worried about it. All right. So let's see if this runs. So here comes the run. And it looks like it worked just fine. And is this what we expected? Sure, that is what we expected, right? So customer ID, first name, last name, and whether or not they're active. One active, one not active, and a bunch of nulls, which are basically question marks. All right. So if we are to create a view out of this, we are going to do a create or replace with this. And I'm going to include the keyword this time, view. And we're supposed to call this VW customer, and they named it like this, customer info. Run the query again. Refresh. And there's our schema, right? And remember, that one worked just fine pulling in that field, even though we were kind of skeptical about it. Now, let's run that view. Hit your run button and hopefully it works. All right. And it seems to be working just fine. And is that all of our directive there? I think there's something else that we need to do. Create the view. All right, we did that. Use the new view in a query to select all the records. Okay, we did that too. And then here comes the last little directive. Then you should be able to update the active column using the view. Update the view by setting the active column to 1 for one of your customers. And it says here that he used Barry Zimmer. All right, so now is going to come this this update approach. And once again, think about like the power of what we're just about to do here. We're going to write an update command on top of a view to change the data inside of a more complicated query. And I think this is really one of the really strong aspects of this technique, by the way. So one thing is like they changed the active status of Barry Zimmer, but I see Barry's already been adjusted for us. Maybe we should worry about Christine Brown. Maybe would be a good one, right? The next one on the list, and we could practice this one a couple of times. So let's go ahead and write an update command, but we're running the update on the view, right? And we're doing customer info, and we're setting active, so one of the columns, we're setting that equal to 1, where the last name equals, in this case, Christine Brown is the person. Now, of course, if there's more than one Brown in the database, I've just set all of them to active, right? So you got to be careful with stuff like this. Normally, you wouldn't attach some sort of a command like this to a last name. You'd attach it to a customer ID is probably smarter. But it would work either way. And now, of course, we want to run this query again to see the results. And notice how Christine Brown is now active. And then if I wanted to make Goldstein, or is it Goldstein? That's a bad joke. Maybe inactive, and just play with this a couple of times, go ahead and run that one, right? And then once again, run the query to see the results of the view. And notice how we're now just going through there one at a time and changing the information. And, I think this is like a really super cool thing if you think about it, because is this also changing the information in the customers table? It should be the question you're asking. That's kind of an interesting thought, right? So let's go to the customers table and run the query. And then notice the active column. We are indeed, even though we're using the view to do the update, the data is propagating to the data table that holds the actual information. So it actually is changing the core information, right? And this is really kind of the important takeaway on this one, that it is doing that piece of it. And folks, I think we've reached the end of the exercise. So we are actually technically done here with the exercises here today. So let's go ahead and stop the recording here. And I guess this recording is done.